So, hello. Thank you very much for being here. My name is Emily Harris, and this is The Art of Interviewing, or How to Do Excellent Interviews in Any Situation. I am guessing that most of you have already done interviews, since you're mostly journalists. So I prepared this not really knowing what the level of experience of the people in the room is. So a lot of it's kind of designed actually to draw on your experience and problems that you've had, that's, tough situations that you've run into. So I've talked to a couple of you individually, but can I just hear from everybody a little bit about your background and what kind of interviews you generally do? I'm also quite curious how much you do in person these days, how much you do on Zoom or phone, and how much you do over email or text, if at all. So can I just go around the room really quickly? And we're going to start with you. I'm going to give you the mic so that it can be recorded.
I'm Cody Mann with Democrat Herald and Corvallis Gazette Times, and I cover crime and courts primarily, also breaking news. I am not people's favorite interview a lot of times because mostly I ask people questions they don't want to answer or they don't want their lawyers to answer also. I do both try to catch people in person in court settings or at breaking news events, and also the court system is great about recording phone numbers for people who are on bail, and so I call a lot of people out of the blue who don't appreciate it. And LexisNexis, of course, is a great tool for finding people and connecting with them either at their home, their phone, their email. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So it doesn't sound like you do a lot of email interviews. You're mostly talking to people.
And I've been on crime course for about a year now. When I was government and politics, I'm a big fan of email, at least to arrange a phone call, if nothing else. Here's an email saying I'm about to call you. Give you 5 minutes to prepare at least, you should know your subject, but also I can't wait all day, and I don't want a manufactured statement out of your email, that's been passed through the city manager and the city attorney before it gets to me.
Okay, so a lot of great tips just in preparing right there. Let me just clarify one thing. So when you email, you will email, I'm going to call you in 5 minutes. Do you actually say in your email, I don't want a prepared statement that's run through your city manager? You're just setting up the situation so that it won't be a prepared statement that's run through.
Phone call with an email or a request for an email conversation, and I will always tell them my editor would prefer a live interview to an email. Some people it's difficult either, location-wise, timing-wise. Sometimes you have to do an email conversation, but we prefer a live conversation in all cases.
Okay, I love blaming it on the editor. That's always a good trick. Okay, she encouraged that. Okay, let's just go around really quickly some more.
I'm Louise Kaplan. I'm with KPOV Radio. Do a show called The Point. It is a talk show. For 2 years during COVID, my co-host Marianne and I did the show via Zoom. Try interviewing people when you can't read their body language. It was no fun. All of my interviews really are in person. Once in a great while I get rooked into a Zoom, but pretty much all in person.
Okay, another great tip from the floor already is body language, right? How important that body language is and how to read that. So I don't want to take up the whole time with introductions. I see a couple more people came in, but I do want to get a quick sense of what you do. So you do also live interviews?
I do live interviews. I'm Marianne Hart at KPOV, and I was Louise's co-host. I interviewed for about 6 years on the air once a week. And I would also send emails to confirm and make sure the person was going to be there where they said they would be. But I've also found that Zoom is very helpful. It just gives you one more option. But like Louise said, you can't really read their body language.
Yeah. So, and live interviews, of course, a little bit different than interviews that you're going to cut up and use later. What kind of interviewing do you do?
I'm going to defer to my husband.
Okay.
I'm Paul Steinley from Ashland.News. So I started doing this in 1961. It's been a while. Actually, Sarah did a lot of interviews. We did a national look at all the newspapers in 50 states, and she interviewed everybody we talked to. So,
oh my gosh!
So she knows
how
to.
Got a ton of experience.
She knows how to do it.
Yeah. So you mostly are doing in-person interviews for print, is that right?
Yeah, I'm the president of the Ashland.News Board of Directors. So.
Okay. Yeah. So nothing. And are you doing interviews anymore these days?
No, I'm retired.
Okay, retired. Great. Well, I'm really grateful we're going to tap into your experience. What kind of interviewing are you doing these days?
I mainly do in-person or phone call. I don't like doing emails. I'm a student journalist at University of Oregon. My name's Bayla.
Great. Thank you. Okay, what kind of interviews do you do these days?
I do a mix of both, in-person and virtual interviews, and I'm an intern at Redmond spokesman this summer.
Great, okay. Okay, this table, what kind of interviews do you do mostly?
I'm with Madras Pioneer. I'm Maryland, and I do all of the above, in-person, email, and telephone.
Okay, great. And how about you, Stephen?
Yep, Stephen Allen with the Times Journal in Condon. I do mostly in person, sometimes on the phone, rarely ever on Zoom or email.
Okay, great. And how about you?
My name is Noah. I work at the Columbia Gorge News in Hood River, mostly in person and phone call interviews as well. Yeah.
Okay, great. And how about you?
I'm Aziza. I also work at the Columbia Gorge News, and I'm quite new. So far I've done in person and then with some follow-up emails.
Okay, fantastic. Great. Sorry for the people on camera that I went off camera so much, but we're glad you can hear everything. Sorry, this is being recorded for later use, and I was told not to leave my area, and I immediately did. So the essence of excellent interviews, I think, kind of come down to two fundamentals. And I'm pretty sure a lot of what I say is not going to surprise a lot of you in this room. So like I said, we're going to tap into your expertise. We're going to do a little role-playing as well to try to work through some of those tough situations that you get into. So start channeling your inner actor. But to me, it comes down to and I should tell you a little bit about myself. I mostly have worked in radio, in public radio, and so I've done a lot of audio interviews, which are a little bit different than when you're cutting for text. And also, some of that has been live. I hosted a talk show for a while. And I've also done very, very fast turnaround interviews. I helped start Axios Portland, which is a daily newsletter covering Portland that covers things in very short, blurby type of writing. So you just need a thing, and you got to go on to the next thing. Right now, I'm helping start a local news nonprofit to close some of the news gaps in different communities around Oregon. So right now I'm not interviewing per se, often a little bit of a different role. But anyway, it still comes down to two fundamentals. Ask what you know and listen to the answer. And so if you take nothing else away from this, that is what I hope you remember. It's a little tricky, right? Because if to ask what you want to know, you have to know what you want to know, right? And I've gone to a million interviews and okay, not really quite prepared, and I feel like I'm pretty good at feeling my way through it, but I tell you, I'm going over the interview, and I'm like, oh, forgot to ask that question, or I read an article I should have read before to prep after I've done the interview, like, oh, I missed the main story. So you can carry on a good conversation, you can follow and listen, but if you don't know what you want to know, it's really hard to get the interview that you want to get. And listening to the answer is pretty obvious. You're listening to on multiple levels, right, for what is the information they're going to provide that you're looking for, but also how they're answering it, what gaps they're leaving, what their body language says, so that you can suss out a little bit more. That's your clues to where to go next. You obviously, probably most of you go into an interview with some kind of list in your head of what you want to cover. But the list in my book is always available to be abandoned if you hear something else in the interview. And it's a little bit more complicated. When you are asking what you want to know, you really do want to go into that interview knowing what you cannot leave without. How many people have had that really hard question they're going to ask somebody, and you ask it, and you think they answer it, but then when you get back to your office or your desk or your couch, wherever you're working from these days, you're like, oh, they didn't quite, I cannot answer that question. I don't really know. I'm sort of around it. I don't have the heart of it. So you really want to know what you can't leave without. And there'll be some situations where you ask that first, and we'll talk about what those situations are, and there's some situations where you are more strategic about where you place that question. And then, as I mentioned before, when you're listening to the answer, you want to listen on multiple levels. You want to be watching them. You want to be interacting. you say you're the kind of interviewer that people don't really love to talk to because you've got all these really difficult questions. You're talking to people in a very difficult moment in their life. They're like in the criminal system right now, right? But it's still, I don't know, do you think of it as a conversation or do you think of it as an interrogation when you're doing interviews?
So it just depends on who you get. Some people, and it depends to a certain degree on what crime or the severity of the lawsuit they're accused of. The higher you go up on the Measure 11 scale, the more likely you're going to get a no comment. The lower down you are, people want to explain. I had a gentleman recently who was involved in a lesser sex crime, and he wanted to explain it to me. And so I listened to him, heard him out. Sometimes you get that, sometimes you don't.
Yeah, that's right. But so you're listening because that'll help you give clues as to like where to go next. If somebody's going to talk, great. If somebody's no comment, well, keep trying. So this might seem super obvious, but why do we as journalists? Why do we talk to people? Why do you talk to people? Everybody in here said they talk instead of interview by email more. But why? What's it for? Yeah. To hear a story. Yeah, that's a great reason to talk to people. What else? Yeah. To get information. A great reason. What else? To gain a new perspective, right. And you're talking to different people, you're going to gain different perspectives. Any other reasons? Really specifically to interview, to talk to people. Because you can get information a whole lot of ways. You could read, for example. You could watch videos. But why do we talk to people? Why do we interview? The person of authority is to get their perspective on the record. Somebody's authority to get their perspective on the record. Yeah, it's a direct source, right? That is a specific person that is accountable for those specific words, which is a really fundamental piece of journalism, as opposed to, people say this, or there's a thought, in the world of this, a thread this way. And it's also to get that first-hand experience in so many different ways. Somebody's an expert. They've studied something for a long time. They have a lot of experience in whatever field it is, or they experienced something firsthand. So people are still like one of the core sources of information for journalists. And I know that sounds really obvious, but I teach at the U of O, mostly in the graduate school, and sometimes I am starting to see among people who are coming into the field a reluctance to interact with people and a higher comfort level with information that is presented often online, and getting back to that, like, let's talk to people. I just wanted to think about why we do that. I have some. Before you leave, if you put your email here, I can email you this presentation. I just put a couple little worksheet pieces in there. There's with these different kinds of interviews, when you use them, and you can kind of make notes yourself on how to make it better. So let's just briefly talk through these. So in-person interview, when would you typically use that? When do you guys always do it when you're doing your radio show live, but when would you strive to talk to somebody, when would you strive to talk to somebody in person rather than do an interview over email, for example? Almost all of you seem to do mostly in-person interviews, which is great. What about you?
Sometimes their website or their formal presentation doesn't really cover the whole story, and you need to be there. I'm sorry, I thought I had that.
That's okay. So you get some information from their...
You can see and interact, and oftentimes they think of things to tell you when they wouldn't have put that online.
Right.
And so as you ask another question, it prompts them to add something that is very beneficial.
Right. So you can, this is a great example. You get a lot of basic background information maybe from a website, but then you go and talk to somebody. The great reason to talk to somebody in that situation is also, who knows when that website was written, right? Yes, there may be lots of information that's not on there. Yeah. Hi. We didn't get to meet you.
I think when it's in person, there's more emotion involved because you see the facial expressions and you get so much more out of the interview as opposed to getting questions back by email or even over the phone. You're not going to hear necessarily or see, what's involved for that person. It's also more intimate. I think you might get more out of that person depending on the type of interview you're
Yeah, and it's also, that's a great point. And it's also so in person is a great to use, especially when you are trying to make that a personal connection, which is pretty much, honestly, so much of the time, right? Because, I mean, we're in the business of relationships in a lot of, what we do, establishing relationships so that we can get information, so that we can transmit it to the greater public that's useful information to them. And then I made another little chart that I can share with you over email just for your own use, thinking about the kinds of different interviews. Does anybody think about interviews in this way? I always think about them this way. Is it an accountability interview? Like, am I trying to hold this person responsible for something? Is it an information interview? I just need to get some information. I need to verify some facts. I need to find out if what I have read is correct. Or I'm getting a story. I need the whole story, like in a chronological manner. Do you guys think about your interviews this way? Let's just talk through this a little bit. So if you're doing an accountability interview, what would the kind of situation be? And what is that? Can somebody define that for me, an accountability interview? I think of it as, go ahead, yeah.
Going on the record, basically. Whatever the person is, whatever they've done, you're trying to find out from the eyewitness or the authority figure, what it meant to them, what the perspective was.
Right. Okay. So an accountability, anytime, because they're talking to you, they're going on the record, whether it's an eyewitness or. Yes. Right. You want to be clear that you're interviewing them on the record. So I think of an accountability interview in a little bit more of a specific way as like usually a person who is in some kind of position of power or who has made some kind of decision. It doesn't necessarily only mean a politician, but somebody who has taken an action or made a decision that affects other people. And so you're trying to hold them accountable. Often it's because they've done something we think is maybe wrong or has caused harm, so you're trying to hold them accountable for that. And those kinds of interviews often take a certain amount of prep because they're some of the easiest to dodge, and we'll give you some practice on that. Informational interviews, I mean, you're trying to get information out of anybody at all times, but sometimes you are just trying to get the facts. When did the museum open? How many people come here? That kind of things. A story type of interview I think of as because I do this a lot in radio because often, especially in long-form audio, you're doing a narrative type of storytelling. So sometimes in an interview, when my goal is to get their full story, and I don't even know for sure where it's going to go, my first question is, let's start at the beginning. What happened first? And then a lot of my questions are, and what then? And what next? And, so just trying, when I know that I need that whole narrative. Emotion, you might use that in, I suppose all of you have probably been looking for emotion out of interviews, emotional reaction or stuff like that. Is that right? In all of your interviews? And what are some of the ways that you find useful to get people to share their emotions? Yeah.
Well, you want to make them feel comfortable. You want to establish a connection with them. You want to really listen to what they have to say, and so that you're open to hearing, not always like jumping in with the next question, but waiting to see what they're going to say next.
That's right. Listening really carefully and showing that you are listening. I mean, there's a lot of sort of pat techniques of nodding, right, eye contact, things like that. But there are some other techniques that I think can make a little bit of a deeper connection, and help you make sure you're understanding, such as reflecting back to them what you just heard. Saying, so somebody tells you, thinking of an example, the car, ran through the intersection, and I heard a loud crash, and I was so scared, and I thought of my kid. And so you might reflect back, okay, so if I understand this right, the first thought that came into your mind when you heard that crash was about your child. So you're picking up on that emotional piece in whatever piece of information I gave you, and and repeating it back to them to make sure you understand it, and at the same time that opens the door for them to talk more about that emotional piece of the reaction. Scenes, what I'm talking about there is when this is mostly in audio. You always need it in audio, but I know in text and video, of course, you need it as well. You want to establish a place, right? You want the person in the place. So when I'm talking about that kind of interview, what I mean is talking to a person in a location that is meaningful to the story, and having them interact with the location in a way that you can write about or you can record some sound about. For example, we'll just go back to this, like a museum is opening kind of story. You might, instead of interviewing the curator in their office, you might follow them around on a tour and ask them to, stand, like when they're at a particularly interesting exhibition that you can describe, being sure that you're asking them questions about that right then. That's what I mean by a scene. So these are some of the ways I sort of just think about my interviews, the goal, the type, how I'm going to interact with them, and the goal for the story. Okay, and then I asked before why we talk to people. So why do you think people talk to us? Want to get their message out. Okay. Other reasons? Yeah?
They want their side of the story because you already have the other side.
They want their side of the story out there because you already have the other side. So that's something that can help you get an interview, right? If you're like, hey, but I've already talked to so-and-so, and I really want to get your perspective as well. That can be a motivator. What are other reasons you think? What are reasons people have talked to you in the past? What do you think? Yeah. Like politicians, they want you to hold, as journalists, to hold other people accountable. So they want to tell you their complaints, their worries. Sometimes the obstacle in an interview is just getting through the preface, right? The prologue that somebody had. I used to work in the Middle East, and I swear I would get an hour of history before I could get like one question in about anything, because there was so much background that people thought it was really important for anybody to know, to be able to understand the context of whatever it was that we were talking about today. What are other reasons people might want to talk to journalists? Yeah. That's right. They might want to get a message out. They might want to test an idea, They might want to, see if they can get favorable coverage, which is so interesting, whatever that they define that as, right? So different people can define favorable as different ways. So, but thinking about why somebody might talk to you can be a really helpful tool ahead of an interview, both to get the interview if it's difficult, and also to help you approach them, right? Why are you here? One of the most difficult interviews, we did not ultimately get this interview, but one of the most challenging attempts to get an interview I had was when a colleague and I were trying to get an interview with the mother of a teenager who had basically been the victim of a traveling sex abuser who would go find young women in different places, first through the internet. And anyway, we did get a chance to talk to her, but she wouldn't talk on the record. But the way that we did was wrote her a letter, had mailed it, and you had to get a signature, but explained that we wanted to hear the story because we were interested in finding the crack in the system that made this possible for this guy to be a repeat offender. And the motivation for that mother to talk to us a little bit, although, like I said, not on the record, was because she did not want this to happen to anybody else as well. So when you can find that, why might this person want to be interviewed, that can be super helpful for getting interviewed. Okay, I want for you guys to just take a sec and think about an interview that went really badly. Okay, something that you're like, ooh, I didn't like that one. Just hold it in your head. And if you have an interview that maybe went better than you'd expected, think about that. And this kind of dovetails with the badly, but when it was you could have an interview that isn't completely terrible, but was challenging for a specific reason. So just take a second and think about your own experience, what those were, and we're going to do a little bit of role playing in a minute. So think about those. I'm going to have a few scenarios in case if people don't want to do their own again. But okay. Okay, we'll get to this stuff in a second. Okay. Everybody got one? A badly or a goodly or a challenging moment? Okay. All right. So how many people are there in here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Perfect. Okay. So we're going to divide into groups of 4. It would be there's 3 roles in these role plays. Okay, one is the person who's going to be the journalist who's interviewing. One is the person who is the interviewee, the source. And then one person is just going to observe, okay? And we'll do a couple rounds, so you'll get to play a couple different roles. So how many of you have ever were, in the high school acting theater program or like ever have been on stage? Okay. All you guys, you're going to be the interviewees first. So can I get the interviewees, you former acting people, to come? I think it was the 3 of you, and you all raised your hand, right? Okay, so you're all going to be interviewed. We're going to break it up into groups and not do. So can you guys come up, because I want to pair you up with it. Come over here so I can get you all in a group. And then how many people feel like they want to practice? You're going to get it. Everyone's got a chance, or at least 2 of you are, who really want to practice a tough situation. Who wants to practice? Who wants to be a journalist? You and you and you and you. Okay, I just volunteered you. Okay, so you guys come over here to this group, and then you 4 are going to be the observers. You're just going to be watching, and then you're going to give some feedback. Okay, just a little bit of gentle feedback. So your job as the people who, once we're on stage for whatever reasons, you're going to be as hard as possible. Okay, you're going to get a very specific situation, and you're going to be a tough interview. Okay, so this is not to let them off the hook. It's going to be hard. It's going to be harder than normal, right? And let's just think briefly about the ways you can be hard. What are the ways that you've had people be just very difficult to interview? What have you faced? One syllable answer is terrible, right? What else?
Acting like they don't want to be there.
Acting like they don't want to be there, right? I don't know, combing their hair, whatever. What else have you run into that's hard? Or that you imagine because you haven't done so much yet?
They're very emotional.
Very emotional. Start crying. Okay. So maybe start hugging you. These are all great. Some others that I've come up with, speaking in phrases that don't really mean anything, right? The whole jargon, gobbledygook, and you think you understand because you're writing it down and you don't really know what they're talking about. They don't stop talking. Many politicians, right? And then when you're live, that's even harder. They try to turn the conversation on to the interviewer, right? Maybe they even accuse the interviewer of something like, "Oh, you got a bias, do you? Like I said, these might be harder than you normally run into. So those are some tools that you can use in your bag of tricks. And you guys are all going to get a scenario with a specific goal. I've got some to give you unless you have one in mind. Is there anything like a challenging situation you've had that you want to try again with a harder person, or a situation you fear that you would like to give yourself a shot at?
I'd love to see what you have.
Yeah? Anybody else got something in mind? I've got some for you. Anybody got something in mind? Okay. Here's my suggestions. All right. So, what's your name? Hannah. You are going to interview a parent whose child died 3 years ago in a school shooting. Your goal is to get a story out of this parent that will move and surprise your audience. Okay? So, parents, journalists, you guys can go sit down, and will you be the observer for this pair? Okay. Let's see. You are interviewing a mayor who just approved taking $10 million from a special fund for clean energy that voters passed several years ago. The mayor took the $10 million to close a budget gap, but not for clean energy. Your goal is to get the mayor to the mayor's going to use the money to close a gap in the police bureau funding instead. Okay, your goal is to get the mayor to justify this in a way that you think will answer the concerns of angry citizens. Well, the mayor didn't run on this platform. It's like, the voters voted in the money, so the voters taxed themselves for money to go to clean energy. The mayor has taken some of that money to close the police bureau. Okay, got it? Okay, you're the mayor. Okay, will you be the whatever it is, the observer? Okay, just to grab a couple seats anywhere. You need a what? You need a what? Easy one? Okay. All right, let's see. Well, okay. You're interviewing, this one is actually one that someone you brought up. You're interviewing a tribal leader about a freshly renovated resort that's expected to bring new revenue to the community after some very difficult years. Your goal is to understand the biggest hopes for the project, the big picture hopes for the project, and to start a relationship with this tribal member. So you want to, that's a big goal, is to get a relationship with this tribal member. Are you a member of a tribe by any chance? Because the goal is to set whoever's doing this outside of their own community. Okay, so you would be working outside of your own community. Okay, you are the tribal leader, the chief, and would you be the observer? Okay, so you three can go over there, and you guys maybe are going to have to pull some chairs over here. Your scenario is you are interviewing a former high school classmate who is facing federal embezzlement charges. Your goal is to find out why the classmate took the money, if they really did. You've read the indictment, and this is not somebody that you were super buddies with, but you were friends. Haven't seen him in a couple of years, but you were friends. All right? So you're the embezzler, or the alleged embezzler, and would you be the observer? Okay, so you guys can just pull some chairs here. So just have at it, and there should be, we've got a new person, that's why. I was like, there should be 3 people at each table, and there are 4. Hi. No, that's okay. Welcome, and you can just be a second observer in that group, okay? Okay, great. Okay. great tip. Always say that's kind of what I was talking about before, reflecting back to them. Like, that's an interesting point of view. Can you elaborate on that more, right? Get into some of the more of the details. Anything particular, like just you felt stymied about? No, good. Okay, I heard a lot of great conversations about it. I hope you got some good feedback in the individual group. We just have a couple minutes, so I will briefly run through a couple more things, and I would be happy to send this to you again if you want to put your email over there. So I also think about interviews, sort of beginnings, middles, and endings, and we talked a tiny bit about planning and prep. Another thing to think about is your greeting and your setup. Even like what you're wearing can sometimes be worth thinking about. Is what you're wearing going to make that person comfortable? Because again, as somebody mentioned, your goal is to have that person not be paying attention to you, but helping them be comfortable enough to focus on themselves. And then one thing to think about a lot is your opening question. What is your first question? This depends on so many things. If you're short on time, your opening question is the one thing you need to know before you leave. And if it's a really hard question, you can do a lot of things to ease it, like, hey, we both know why I'm here. Why did you steal the $1 million? Right? Bingo. And they won't answer it, so you ask it again and you ask it again. But thinking about your opening question, if you have longer time, if you're trying to establish more of a relationship, how to play with that. In the middle, I think about the middle is lots of different pieces to think about. If you're trying to get a whole chronology, you're going to need time with somebody, and you're going to need to stick with that chronology, because once you leave the chronology, it's really hard to get back to it. You can, if there's a tangent you want to go down, and that's again the listening part, but you want to be sure to, if you need a chronology from this person, you need to get that whole chronology and be focused on that. Changing gears, fact and perception checks. If you are trying to actually check a specific fact, it's very good to bring with you the exact fact and the source and have it written down, because there's nothing worse than saying, hey, you stole $1 million. Who said that? Where'd you get the, and you want the actual source that you can refer to. That also takes some of the pressure off, I'm not accusing you. Here's this fact that's out there. Perception checks about how, reflecting back and do I understand you correctly that you mean this? I thought that would have been a great thing to have in that presidential debate. If the reporters had been able to say things like, do I understand you correctly to mean this, we would have gotten a little more clarity perhaps. Changing gears is something to think about when you're planning. Like if you have kind of a couple things you want to cover, or you feel like the interview is going in the wrong direction, or it's getting a little tense or something like that, think about how you would shift to a different subject. You can be really overt and say, there's something else I wanted to cover, blah, 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 or you can just have a transition sentence. But think about your transitions before you go into interview. You think about whether if they have answered the question well enough that you can quote them. This is, as an audio journalist, I'm listening all the time on like levels of what are they saying, but also like, can I cut that? Is that a complete sentence? Did they leave out a verb? Did they leave out a noun? So you're kind of, with print you have a little bit more flexibility because you can just quote a couple words and stuff like that. But one thing you can do in an interview, if you haven't gotten a quotable answer yet, ask the question in a different way. So that's a good trick. The challenging questions, we've covered this in a bunch of ways, but I think the best answer to like asking a hard question is to just ask it, and ask it as simply as you possibly can. That's back to that, ask what you want to know. And then there's the ending section of the interview. I always ask them if there's anything else that they would like me to know, or that they think people should understand about their experience or about their perception. A lot of times I get the best information in that piece. And sometimes it's because this is what they've been wanting to say the whole time, and somehow they feel like they haven't been able to. You always want to double check, right? At the ending, if you're recording your interviews, you want to make sure it's recorded, double check the spelling, etc. And thank them. And then here's a practice that I would really encourage, if you don't already do it, to keep your interview relationship going, is to share that story that you did with them. Send them a link. And I actually find that helpful. Knowing I'm going to do that helps me read my story over and think, can I defend this to the person I interviewed? Can I, even if I said some stuff that they would really not want to read or hear, I can explain, can I face them and explain to them why where that came from and why it's in there and why it's okay from the perspective of the public which you're serving. So if you can't do that, think about why you can't, and maybe the story doesn't need to change. But anyway, sharing your story. I wrote down a ton of other questions that always come up in interviewing, and the only one I want to go over is two. How you make sure people you interview are clear on the terms, like whether you're on the background or off the record or whatever. I have sometimes printed out the AP the AP definitions of on background, on the record, whatever, and brought it with me in certain situations. I say we're doing this, and they read it, and so then we know, because it sometimes means different things to different people. So if you're talking on anything except on the record, and even that, just make sure. And also to take more care with people who are not professional speakers to journalists, like ordinary people. Just make sure that they know they don't have to talk to you, right? That they can say this is off the record, stuff like that. And then I just want to take the temperature of the room really quickly on this. Is it okay to interrupt? Who thinks it's okay to interrupt, and who thinks it's not okay to interrupt? Okay to interrupt. Okay, we've got a majority. Not okay to interrupt. Nobody says not okay to interrupt. I would say it is definitely okay to interrupt when people are avoiding you, going off the subject, things like that. If they are answering your question, be very cautious about interrupting, because that can make them feel like they're not being listened to. But if they're dodging, or if they're talking too long, or you're running out of time, or whatever, it seems like probably most of you are comfortable with interrupting. So thank you very much. I want to ask you all a favor, which is I'm also a graduate student, and I'm doing a survey of journalists to find out if any, to look for tools that might be helpful to people reporting at this time of great divide and division in the country. So I have a little survey that's online, and I'm going to give you a QR code, and if you wouldn't mind taking the survey, it's no obligation, but I would really appreciate it, and I would love to stay in touch. You can grab my card, which is right here, if you want, and if you want any materials from the session, just send me a note, or give me your email or send me a note, and I will send you what I've got. So thank you very much. And I'll stick around a bit if anybody has specific questions about interviewing or whatever. Okay. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.